Excellent. Well, I am going to assume that we are live and in person on all of our various channels. Welcome to Music Portland, first Monday, December 2020. I'm Mara McLaughlin. I'm executive director and co-founder, along with Chris Young of Vortex Music Magazine, of the organization known as Music Portland. And Music Portland is a grassroots nonprofit that supports both the art and the music, or the business of music in the Portland area. So that's for all genres, for all music businesses that support creation, performance, distribution, promotion, or anything having to do with independent music. And this is an update, we are both a trade association that supports expanding the economic opportunities for music professionals and businesses. And as of a week ago, we are now also a charitable organization bent on supporting the creative and social interests of our independent music culture. So I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But in the first bit, welcome to this last first Monday of 2020. This year has tested our music community in ways unimaginable. So I wanted to take a moment in this end of year gathering to acknowledge how this hardship has actually revealed the greatness of our community. We've witnessed unprecedented generosity and self-sacrifice, and I wanted to note some of the things that I know about. And if any of these apply to any of you, just take it to heart and know that you are marvelous. We've seen artists performing for free for causes to raise money for people in need. We've seen artists and music venues and businesses at the height of their own economic insecurity contribute to relief programs for those that need. And we've heard from all types of people who have voluntarily opted out of government employment benefits that they're eligible for to, quote, make sure that there's enough to help everybody else that needs it more. We've seen music venue and music business owners sacrifice a huge amount, even personally, to support their employees for as long and as well as they were able. We've seen incredible gratitude in messages from music people that have been forced to ask for help publicly and who were then posting notes of gratitude to the music peers who stepped up to help them. We've seen COVID pivots from organizations that work to sustain music programming and people, including groups like the Jeremy Wilson Foundation, Friends of Noise, Musicians in Solidarity, the Musicians Union, Independent Venue Coalition, and others. And I would like to thank personally each of you that's raised your hand and created a Music Portland profile, or if your means allow, has become a supporting member for a few dollars a month. These are acts of faith in uncertain times. It's faith. Every time I see one, I'm wowed by the faith that people have that independent together, we can rebuild our music ecology. We can make it better and more equitable and more sustainable. Faith that in solidarity, our galvanized community is becoming a powerful and effective voice to influence policies and systems and funding challenges that currently impede music success. Faith that community creates opportunity and opportunities create individual and collective success. First Mondays and the more than 60 events we've hosted since we launched at Holocene in September of 2018 have confirmed this. I have faith and I see faith that there are no individual businesses or band or performer or venue that can truly be successful in Greater Portland in isolation. We need each other. As an example, venues might not have been as successful at securing the largest city and state funding in the country if hundreds of other music professionals hadn't written to elected leaders or called to explain why venues are the workspaces that they rely on. So Music Portland's been incredibly proud to serve this remarkable community for the last 2 years, and we're excited to expand our work. As I promised, the update is that last week we were approved as a 501c3 charitable organization. We're calling that Music Portland Bridge, but it'll all operate under a Music Portland umbrella. And what it means is we can gather funds for projects like musician production or touring grants, or equity initiatives, or Portland area music history. The C6 part of our organization will remain laser focused on work that will create economic development and opportunities for our music industry as a business, and things like GearFest and our new soon to be launched music industry directory. So right out of the gate as a C3, we secured $40,000 in grant from Oregon Community Fund. And this money has already been committed to two specific purposes. 75% of the grant is to the only BIPOC female-owned music venue in the entire Pacific Northwest. So there's one thing we definitely have to deal with. Aphrodite's Jazz Club, just east of the Portland city line. They were ineligible for any of the CARES money that was available to all the other venues. So we created a C3 as a way to help them get private funding. The other 25% of this grant money will support our newly formed leadership equity advocacy project called MusicPortland LEAP for short. That's a wholly BIPOC-led exploration of inequity in our music ecology and creating solutions to build representation, equity, access, and opportunity. More news is going to come about the C3 program as we go along, but for now, know that all MusicPortland Bridge programs, all of the grants, all of the things will be accessible to people who have acknowledged themselves as local music professionals or businesses. And that includes all the artists. And that acknowledgement, there's no other way to do it in this city, is done by completing a MusicPortland profile. It's free, it takes 3 minutes. If you've never done it, do it right away. If you filled one out more than a year ago, do it again, because we're actually trying to capture people's best recollection of the realities that they were in at the moment of shutdown. We want to know what we're building back to so we can measure against that. If you have any questions or about the profile or who we are or what we do, check out musicportland.org or contact us at info@musicportland.org. And I'm happy to set up a call to answer any questions or anything else, but we want every one of you listening to be part of this movement. It's making change. So let's dive into this fantastic conversation about alcohol and music. I'm going to introduce the panelists and then our moderator. Take it away. So first of all, we have Scott McLean, who is co-founder and co-owner of Holocene, a beloved venue that's hosted thousands of concerts and events, including consistent support for all ages programming and for cause-based events, including MusicPortland's own launch event in 2018 and our musician health program in December of last year. Holocene also recently hosted the Portland Black Music Expo, and there are too many more to mention, but thank you so much for joining us, Scott. And next up, we have Nathan Ricks, who's Deputy Director of Strategy and Policy with the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, or OLCC. He cops to being an avid music and dance fan. Apparently Lindy Hop is big in the mix. He's a self-proclaimed believer in the foundational value of arts and music in our society. He's committed to a collaborative governance approach, and we welcome him into this creative discussion about what a new normal might look like at the intersection of music and alcohol. It's outstanding to have you here with us, Nathan. And I can't see, I hope you guys are waving as I say these things so that people can connect names and faces. Next up, we've got Samuel Thompson, who is a Portland native, a former bar owner and founder of Next Level Enterprises, LLC, that is a promotional event coordinating company. He's also a pivotal force in Portland's equity movement and is an advocate for all kinds of good evolutions in our city around equity and representation. So thanks for participating, Sam. And then we have Andre Middleton, who is Executive Director of Friends of Noise, that provides access, education, and community for youth performers, aspiring music crews, and entrepreneurs. Friends of Noise is building a pipeline to create a better future for music in our area. He's a leading local advocate for all ages access to live music. Welcome, Andre. And finally, on the panelist roster, we've got Roderick Pantang, who is kind of like having three panelists in one. First, he spent years managing music venues in Chicago, so he can speak about alcohol and music management in another city. Secondly, he now promotes some music shows at places like the Roseland, Jack London, and the Botanist. And lastly, he represents high-end liquor brands and works to create unique programming that supports music and culture. So welcome, Roderick. And finally, the discussion will be moderated by Bim Ditson. Bim is a well-known Portland musician who is both on the MusicPortland board and the MusicPortland Policy Council. Bim is deeply committed to positive change in our city and is the perfect person to be guiding this discussion. I want to remind everybody that after this presentation and this panel discussion, we're going to move over to a different Zoom room that allows everybody to talk, and we'll break into random groups of 4 or 5 people and have a conversation and talk about what we've just been talking about, then come back together and break again. So the goal is, like at a physical event, give everybody time to meet new people, talk about what we're talking about. So stick around for that. We'll be putting the link in the chat as we get close to the end of this session. So Bim, I'm going to leave it to you. Please take it away.
Thanks, Mara. And yeah, thanks to all the panelists for being here and everybody who's joining us and tuning in. And we're excited to kind of break out afterwards as well. I think that today is kind of about building or starting to try to pour a foundation that's based in collectivism and just trying to figure out where the common ground is throughout our industry, throughout the culture of music in Portland, throughout all the different parts of the city that it touches. And what we've seen, at least in my lifetime, like say in the last 20 years, a short little window of Portland music, is that it's been difficult for the music community and industry to self-determine how it relates to music or how it relates to alcohol. And so one thing that I would like to see us target is just envisioning a future where we as musicians and as music professionals kind of can drive that conversation and say, here's what we would like alcohol to do for us, rather than it being us kind of going, okay, here's everything that alcohol does to us, you know? So hopefully that's where we can kind of keep our focus. And I think that other than that really, really broad concept, I'm not really in charge, you know? It's really just about everybody bringing their own input, and we just kind of see what happens from there. So with that said, I'd like to just have each of the panelists just kind of give, 2-3 minutes of a little bit of what brings you specifically to this conversation, what excites you about right now, the work that we can do in all of the various contexts that we're coming from right now and where we're going to in the next, year or two, so that we can kind of focus in on what's doable for each of you. So maybe let's start. I'll just go the way that things are on my screen. Let's start with Sam. And you can just kind of introduce yourself to everybody so people know who you are and what we're doing here with you.
Right. Good evening, everybody. Once again, my name is Samuel Thompson. I am a community organizer, promoter, former bar owner here in Portland, Oregon, as well as I do restorative justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion work with the school district and various organizations throughout Portland. The reason why I am here, number one, just thank you very much, Mira and MusicPortland, for the opportunity to be on the panel. But I believe that I speak to a very different, dynamic, different group of people in terms of African Americans trying to be productive and profitable in the music scene in Portland, Oregon. As I said before, I did about 10 years ago, actually, almost 10 years ago, own Seasoning Sports Bar and Grill. So had a bar, in my 20s, which I was very proud of. But at the same time, we as African Americans here in Portland disproportionately have, it's not as equitable for us in this realm, in this scene, in terms of business ownership, promotion, all of those things. And so I want to kind of participate in this conversation about how it affects those who do focus on African-American hip hop events, the relationship between alcohol, OLCC, Portland Police Department, and hip hop music, and all of those things that I've seen not be quite as equitable, fair, or inclusive. And so just want to lend a voice to that. I've been the host of Good in the Hood here in Portland for the last 8-9 years, as well as part of the board for Juneteenth, and a lot of other events that are very prominent in the African-American community here in Portland, Oregon. And so just wanted to lend my voice, my experience to this conversation.
Awesome. We're stoked to have you here, Sam.
Appreciate
it. Cool. And then maybe let's move to Andre.
Hey, my name is Andre Middleton. As Mara said, I'm the executive director, one of the founding members of Friends of Noise. We are a nonprofit that supports really a healthy and inclusive and safe all ages music scene. And when we say all ages, we literally mean that we have youth and adults being entertained and sharing themselves and sharing their music in same safer spaces. So that means having adults on bills with young people and having young people on bills with adults. We're really looking for a way that we can find the resources and means and spaces where alcohol is not a primary component of the event. How are we putting the music first? How are we putting the creativity first? And how is alcohol sales secondary? We can't deny that the sale of anything, whether it's food, whether it's beverage, is an ample and active part of our capitalist system events. But there are examples around the world, in Europe and South America, in Africa, where you literally have art hubs that are designed for the sharing of art and not designed for the sharing of alcohol or sharing of other things like that, where young people are an intrinsic part of that in creative endeavor. So we actually are hoping that one day we can actually build in the Portland metro area an all ages facility where families, where teenagers, where kids, where adults can come together and see live music, see live plays, see movies in a way that encourages the next generation of artists to come into the scene. I mean, right now, we support at least 200 to 300 local artists that are all under the age of 21, and it is very hard for them to see the role modeling of where they want to be in 5 to 10 years because they don't have access to a lot of adult venues. But they do have access to some, so I don't want to poo-poo that the Wonder Ballroom has done, the work that Holocine's done, the work the Mississippi Studios has done. So there's a lot of venues who are working to figure out ways that they can do it creatively. Granted, there are additional costs that come with doing that kind of creative thinking, but I'm confident that if we really put our minds to it, especially coming out of this COVID time, the pandemic, we're going to need some real creative and innovative solutions to get this engine of this creative economy going again. Me, and I look forward to hearing everybody's input today.
Awesome. Thanks, Andre. Yeah, and if anybody missed it, check out Friends of Noise. Andre's got a great thing going on there. So, lots of stuff coming down the line too soon. So very cool to see all of that work. Let's go to Scott.
Hey everyone, I'm Scott McLean, and I'm with Holocene. Let's see, I think, what the reason I think I'm here is, well, first of all, Holocene is a 300 cap independent venue in Southeast Portland, and we do all sorts of all ages shows, dance parties, private events, different, like, runs the gamut of kind of a blank canvas sort of venue. And I think the reason I'm here is because as a venue promoter, a venue owner, I see both sides of the inner workings of the business decisions that we have to make in order to basically stay alive and pay our staff, and what shows might our bartenders receive the most tips from versus what the audience and what the band and what the agent might want from a show. We're kind of constantly balancing these two things to try to kind of find the kind of a business that works for us, as individuals and as as our staff, and then also as as what the community needs. And in the last couple of years, maybe the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a real kind of need for more all ages shows and venues, or a venue to host all ages shows. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but we really saw an opportunity to kind of take advantage of the void in the scene, so to speak, to start doing more all ages shows. Although our venue isn't really perfectly set up for it. I mean, there's a lot of bottlenecks, literally, that you have to kind of deal with in order to kind of pull off a show at Holocene that's all ages. But we've hosting way more of a variety of shows. Like from Billie Eilish to all sorts of younger artists that are coming through, mainly because it's all ages. We can do all ages shows. But that said, it's really economically challenging to do that. I mean, there's a reason why there's all ages venues have had a hard time surviving in Portland. All ages venues the size of Holocene or smaller. So I'm here to kind of give my expertise, so to speak, on promoting all ages shows, and then also what we have to do as a venue to be creative, like Andre said, to be able to kind of supplement or subsidize those shows in some ways. And then also to share some ideas and talk to you guys about some of the other ideas that I have as far as, how can we disassociate alcohol and drinking from shows, and how we kind of have a less alcohol focused all ages music scene.
Very cool. Yeah, it's kind of like you can look at places like Holocene as like testing grounds for what's possible in the current regime, which is very interesting to me, to just see what can be done for now. And it'll be interesting to hear, Scott, what you have to think about what could be done in a different set of environment.
Totally.
So cool. Let's go to Nathan.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Nathan Ricks, and I lead strategy and policy here with OLCC. A little bit about my background. So I was part of the team that started the recreational marijuana program about 5 years ago, and then left and came back in this new deputy director role. So admittedly, my expertise is more on the marijuana side, but now that I lead the policy for the whole agency, I've had a chance, especially through the COVID pandemic, to understand really just how big and expansive our liquor regulation system is here in the state. A combination of laws, of our own rules, and then of what local jurisdictions do. So I just want to say from the outset that I come in a spirit of listening. I really think that for there to be progress on any fronts, for there to be change, it really starts with listening and having that open mindset, and then being able to have that as a foundation for talking about what change looks like. I can share a little bit more about this later, but we are undertaking an overhaul of our liquor rules, what they look like just within our OLCC control, over the beginning of the new year. And so I think this really is a really opportune time to have a conversation about what it would look like to modernize liquor regulation, our licensing system in general in Oregon. And it's something that, frankly, as awful as COVID has been, it's, I think, given a lot of folks on our team and some of the newer folks that have joined new eyes to see what our system looks like. And there are a lot of things that we've seen across the nation with respect to alcohol agencies or marijuana agencies, because the folks that do inspections in the hospitality industry have become the hands and feet of a lot of governors to do enforcement action. And, we run kind of like pretty much like a business, in that we, sell distilled spirits. We have our licensing program, but we're some of the only ones in state government outside of the public health and direct service medical community that's really out in society, right, doing these sorts of checks. So we've had to pivot in our whole business model, the whole way we operate, to go into restaurants and bars when they were, open for indoor service, especially making sure that face masks were on and social distancing was kept. all that done, of course, at the request of the governor. So that retasking of how we work has made us see our fundamental core values in a different way. And so I'm just, again, eager to listen and learn, happy to clarify where I can. I know government often gets lumped as one big thing, right? One government system. And I find that it's helpful when, we can clarify and distinguish where, certain boundaries begin and end with what you can change or where you insert influence. So I'm happy to answer those kind of technical questions. And the one thing I'd ask is if you have like a specific question about a bar or, specific licensing issue that we follow up by email, because I typically, don't speak to the specifics of cases, but talking in broad scope about policy, looking forward to that.
Cool. Yeah, and thanks for being here, Nathan. I know there's a lot of people on this call who are very curious to know what you have to say. Let's go to Roderick, and then we'll open up with then we'll start.
Hey, my name is Roderick Pantang. I've run music venues in Chicago and open states, but I also have run venues here in Portland. And it's just one of those things where like I'm excited to be part of a conversation that I feel like is really starting to like galvanize people. Right now is a time to have these conversations. Right now is a time to figure out what is going to work for like the venues that are going to serve alcohol, and then what are their pivots as well, because there are other new products hitting the market that are non-alcoholic that are also going to be part of something that's just starting out here in Oregon, Portland. So from that perspective, and actually even just listening to a policy perspective, when I was in Chicago, I worked with the Chicago Hospitality Association there. And what we did is we worked with the aldermen, the community, and we were sort of a peer network that would actually, like, you would have your responsible operators that would almost kind of help mediate and speak to policy issues or community issues they might have with a particular establishment. So I'm just happy to be part of the conversation, and it's like I'd like to interject like anything I can from my perspective. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Roderick. Yeah, so I guess there's a ton of different ways we could start here, but I think that like maybe a good place to start is to just whoever wants to raise their hand first can just jump in and answer this. But is alcohol fundamentally related to live music, or are they a marriage of convenience? Is this, like that's kind of my big picture question is like, how important is alcohol to music if it doesn't generate income? Anybody want to jump in?
Oops, sorry. I was like, where is my hand? If it doesn't generate income, I think it depends on the age of the person.
Yeah.
It depends on who you're talking to. I mean, someone who's 21 plus or even 18 plus is probably going to want to drink alcohol at a show. I think it also depends on the genre of the music. It's like, if it's a folk show, probably, much less important. But if it's, some sort of, kind of raucous band, maybe, then, people are going to want to drink. Kids, if like you're 12 and 13, you're not even thinking about it. All you care about is the band. You can, you might want to have like, a Coke or, some sort of Red Bull or something like that, kind of dangerous. But I mean, it's kind of, it's much less of an issue, From the venue side, I think it's very much, kind of, it's ingrained in the decision making, kind of like I was mentioning before. I think in some ways if you're comparing two shows you're making an offer on, let's say, and you love both bands equally, one of them is an all ages show and one of them is a 21 plus show. And you're trying to make a decision for, you know, the staff and your bottom line. Chances are you're going to choose, you know, the show that's 21 plus, that's probably going to have a $3,000, $4,000 bar versus a $500 bar. But I think, you know, you know, going back to the original thing, it really depends on the genre. I think it depends on, you know, who's going to the show. So in some ways it is part of it, but in some ways, you know, it isn't, you know.
Cool. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I could speak to that too. Is one of really interesting things when we were running, we used to run probably about 40% of our shows were all ages. And it was interesting to me watching the all ages bands play and build a following. And at a certain point, they became old enough to consume. Like they went from 15, 16, 17 years old to, like, you know, having a really strong following that was built on these all ages shows that eventually turned into something that became equitable. It took years of you know, believing in the band and working with them. And honestly, because I used to run security there as well, you kind of taught the kids how to behave over the years. So by the time they got to be old enough to actually have, you know, alcoholic beverages, they knew the mores. They knew what you could and couldn't do because they were coming to all ages shows at the same venue. So, you know, like I've watched the progression of these all ages shows turn into something, quote unquote, that may be equitable based on the fact that, like, we taught the kids how to behave at a show, you know. So, I mean, I think it can go both ways with things that I've seen multiple bands become that, you know, that equitable show based on you know, the generations of kids. I mean, my old venue has been around for 38 years. So, I mean, we saw multiple generations of people coming to shows. We used to do something called Baby Loves Disco, where, like, the old punk rock kids would take their kids and, like, they would play all the music they listened to back then. And they would literally we would have photographers, and we partnered with, like, a bunch of the toy companies, and it just became this, like, sort of kind of like photo op for the kids with all the music they grew up to listening to at the venue they used to go to. So, like, they felt like they were kind of passing the torch, sort of a thing with their kids. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot that can be done with all ages shows. And, you know, just because I kind of work in that industry that involves the alcohol aspect, I see where it can go and what it can be, you know. So
Yeah, and that, let's get to Andre, but I'd like to just put a note on that's, you're speaking of what it's like in Chicago, where
yes, that's correct.
where the rules allow for that situation, and then the venues kind of instinctively react to that environment and go, of course it's worth investing in the youth because they're our future. Let them in, you know, like they're part of the whole thing, you know. So yeah, it's interesting to see how it works where it's a little bit different, you know. It's just, as far as just stepping back, there's different rules, you know. So I'd like to go to Andre for this too, because you know exactly how it works in Portland too.
Right. And it's interesting. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Very different city than Portland. So I more raised in different cities and municipalities. Interesting looking at how Portland and Oregon overall is such a libertarian state. So it's interesting how that dynamics worked out. But I wanted to flip the question and say, how important is music to selling alcohol, as on the flip side of how important is alcohol to selling music? You know, I think that, you know, in some ways, I've been as a child and as an adult where alcohol might have been sold, but it wasn't, you know, sold with neon signs all over the building, where that seemed to be the primary function of that facility, you know, where, and like to what Scott was saying, whether it's classical music, I mean, you can go anywhere and, you know, there might be wine spritzers in the back, but, you know, people aren't, you know, having trays through the main room while they're enjoying the music. You know, one of my favorite venues I always loved and cherished was La Luna. And you would have as many people that were underage in front of the house, in front of the building, excuse me, in front of the stage that drinking alcohol was not a part of their equation. They weren't even thinking about it because they came to see Hazel, or they came to see Pond, or they came to see David Byrne whoever came through town. But they did have a sizable area that was in the back of the room where alcohol was being sold, and they had great security. And it was a model, like Scott said, and the environment fit. And while kids might have, tried to clamor in and see what they could get away with, that's America for you, where everybody's going to try and do what they can get away with. I personally, professionally don't think that alcohol is needed to sell music. I think there are people who are traveling across the country on a variety of platforms, the way now music is accessible, whether it's Spotify, whether it's YouTube, whether it's your internet, that we can get to a place where we're not training kids or teaching kids how to navigate an alcohol fueled or an alcohol as a catalyst system, but how are we teaching kids to just love music and to love expressing themselves through music and not have it be such a, on a pedestal, but it be part of their everyday life. So hopefully that's a flip side to that question.
Yeah, I love it. Sam?
So I definitely believe that the correlation between alcohol and music is really based on venues. It's to make money. We got to get you. If you want to make more money, you must sell some alcohol, right? And that's just that's the truth. If we're being completely candid with the whole situation, it's very exciting to be able to do all ages events and all of those things. But if you're talking strictly from a business sense and trying to create a profit margin, alcohol needs to be, in a lot of situations, it needs to be a part of, and so I think that's what the importance of alcohol is to music, right? You can have an event with all ages and you can get 500 people in the building to buy tickets. And then at that point, you really, most of your money came from the tickets that you sold. Now you're selling $3 waters and $5 Red Bulls. But then if you flip that, and at the same time, now you step up into a thing where you're selling $11 Hennessy's and $15 Don Julios, that's where, the money part of it changes. And I think that the reason why alcohol plays such a quote unquote important role in the music scene, in the club scene, in the venue scene is because of the amount of money that it makes and what it allows venues and venue owners. Because as we heard earlier, people, we plan certain events by how well our bartenders and staff are going to be tipped. And tips grow as more alcohol flows, right? So somebody's going to get a $3 water, they're not giving you $7 for that. You know what I'm saying? So I think the reason why alcohol plays the role that it does in music and it's in correlation and type of importance is because of the money that it generates. So
Can I just add something? That's a really good point, Sam. I think the economics of putting on a show, if you take alcohol, the bar out of a show, the margins are really thin. Like you're looking at trying to make a 15% margin on a show, and if it's a $12 $15 ticket, you're paying the band $1,500. You have to have extra security, so you're adding that on. You might make $250 $300 from the show. And so economically, it's really hard to sustain a venue, with those numbers. And like Sam says, alcohol gives you the sort of freedom to, like you don't have to depend on the ticket sales. And if you take alcohol away and you're looking at, other revenue sources, then the venue starts to kind of share in, ticket fees start to go up or merch cuts start to go up. A lot of different little revenue streams that bands and tours are looking to make. VIP, experiences that are generating a decent amount of money for bands now. Venues will want to take a little bit of that as well, because if they're not making money from the bar, then they're trying to get a little bit of money from any little revenue source that they can. So alcohol is a subsidy in a lot of ways, and that's, back in the day when I first met Roderick, I mean, we would talk about, alcohol brands supplementing, like advertising costs, or buying, paying for a DJ to come out for a dance party that's trying to develop. I mean, it's definitely kind of consistently played its role as a subsidy,
Yeah, excellent points all around. Yeah. And it's interesting just to hear how many, with a simple question like that, how much there is here. Like there's just so much going on with how tightly tethered these two things are, and that's due to all of these pressures. I think not just economically, but there are kind of social, like just kind of standards that are set by that subsidy. What happens is a music fan like myself, who, in normal times goes to 5 or 6 shows a week, is going to expect lower ticket prices because of that subsidy. And I don't even know that that's why, even though I'm not even a drinker, and so it is kind of interesting to see who ends up carrying the economic burden. Is it people who are maybe drinking in a problematic way are actually subsidizing my sobriety at a live show? Like, what's going on there? It's interesting to see how complex those things can get, and how quickly you can end up in a situation where it's not clear who is driving the outcome. It's clear to me that artists are not driving the outcome as much as I would like, but I'm an artist, and so then it's like, how do we share power in that? And one thing I think that a lot of, that most of us can agree on, is that the power sharing maybe has been a little bit more on the side of alcohol purveyors and producers, like at the state level, at a larger rulemaking level. It's not been venues or musicians or promoters who have had as much power at that table. And that's something that I'm interested in, is like, how can we build that power? How can we interact better with OLCC as a block to not only be able to shape our industry and what subsidies we want, what parts we want to be able to allow 18 and plus, where we want to balance everything. And I think a lot of that is going to come from us acting as a group, us coming together and going, yes, let's do this Friends of Noise venue. Let's do Holocine's thing. Let's do Sam's thing. Let's do everybody's thing. But let's realize that at the end of the day, it only works if we have each other's back, when it comes down to it, and we can pool resources to actually get outcomes.
It's interesting also to think about, I really love this conversation talking about who's paying for what and what value. I mean, I look at professional sports. I mean, people don't blink an eye to spend, X number of a cup of beer at a Blazer game, or they're willing to pay up to, $100, $200, $300, $400, $500 per ticket to go see a sports game. But when they have, music that is going to come through town once or twice a year, because it's a band that they've been dying to see or they've heard of, and they've kind of seen them on YouTube or whatever, then they're still looking for that relatively cheap price. So I think it's interesting to think about the branding of, entertainment, who's holding the cards as far as access to that, and what leverage can be built from the different stakeholders, from the musician stakeholder, from the venue stakeholder, from the from the alcohol or food or sales stakeholders. But you're right, it's a complex melange, a complex tapestry, and we have a real issue of sustainability. So many venues go down or for a time, but there are very few venues that have lasted for 30, 40, 50 years here in Portland, unless they had something more than just the alcohol sale. They had to build up a better level of loyalty with an audience, and that audience had to grow and change, because Satiricon would still be here, Pine Street would still be here. So it's a very interesting discussion about how that real brand is built and who's benefiting from the leverage that brand can bring to bear.
Yeah, and I want to get Nathan in here, because I've got a question I think that you may be able to just directly answer. But I wonder, I know that a lot of times we'll hear from venue owners talking about like enforcement and conflicting, people are confused about the rules a lot. And that's kind of like the nature of having a lot of rules for something. Alcohol, there's a lot of rules for alcohol in Oregon, as far as like how you serve alcohol in an establishment. And so what we see is that sometimes there's different organizations. There's, from the way that PPB is enforcing to CCL to OLCC, and it's hard for venue owners to navigate that in a way where they can just do the right thing. So one of the questions that I have is like, how possible would it be for us as a block to come together saying, we are Portland music. It's all inclusively Portland music. How can we then say we're definitely that and interact with you in a way that's going to interact with OLCC as an institution? A lot of what happens is we have individuals trying to interact with an institution, and all of a sudden the individual loses every time because the inertia is just so much more on the institution. So how could we best position ourselves to represent each other in our community with you? How can we reach out and create better dialogue so we don't have, there are horror stories in Portland, like if you try and open a venue that's going to book hip hop, you've got a bunch of different institutions that might knock on your door and say something not nice, and it's like, we got to figure that out. And like me as a music person, I'm like, yeah, we got to figure that out. Even though I'm not booking hip hop, I want it to be there because there's no punk without hip hop. It's like, so we're trying to put it simply, how do we interact in a way that's positive, that creates the kinds of changes that make sense for all of us? How can we work with you?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're asking that question, and appreciate you asking it, because I think people are more powerful together, right, in groups than they are as individuals. So I think that's you're off on a good start there. So I think there are two like key levers that you have, right, where you can exert influence, or really maybe three, but two of them are kind of the same. And the first is really being able to assemble what the problems that you see are, and what you suggest as solutions. And I mean, I've heard just kind of two, and I'm reading between the lines here a little bit, just listening to y'all, right? But I've heard two things. I think early on, Roderick brought up an example from Chicago, talking about mediators when there's issues. Like, how do you work through a third party or someone that's sort of playing a neutral role? And the second thing I kind of read between the lines was this idea of specifying what part of a licensed premises a minor could be served where there's no alcohol, but still have access to music and entertainment. And then outside of that, right, how could you, have the adult space? And, that of course gets into, our rules and how OLCC thinks about licensed premises. And, I think, again, it's timely, and I saw a few questions in chat, so I'll just take a minute to kind of expand on where I think you all can bring your collective thoughts on this. So we initiated a project, and this was at our public commission meeting. If you really want to go back and listen to it, you can. We've got all of our commission meetings online. This was I believe it was in November, where we initiated rulemaking on the entire Division 5 and Division 6 of our alcohol rules. And so that's like all of our licensing. And in talking with some of our technicians, I asked, when was the last time we actually opened up rulemaking on all these? Because it does take our commission saying, you have a license to hunt, essentially, to do this work. And one of the individuals has been at the agency for 30 years and couldn't remember a time where we tried to comprehensively open up the rules and look at them holistically. Verifiably, I know it hasn't been done in the past 10 years, but in this person's memory, 30 years, right? I think the last time and this is well before I joined the commission, but I know there was a robust conversation in about 2012 around food carts and serving alcohol from food carts. And that bringing up a question about, can a food pod be its own licensed premises? And from what I've read, at the time, that idea basically got shut down because of the perception that it could encourage street drinking and that sort of stuff. If you have someone, give them a cocktail or bar from a food pod. So I think, as an agency, we've sort of shied away from having those kinds of conversations because of that 2012 history. And because frankly, we just weren't in the right mindset, I don't think, to think, what does it mean to modernize our liquor rules so they work for the hospitality industry and the entertainment industry. So what that's going to look like moving forward is at some point, probably in the next 2 months or so, there'll be a rules advisory committee that's appointed by the commission to think through the issues that we bring to them along those rules. And those are all public meetings. It's an open conversation basically between the policy analysts and the technicians that are looking at that whole set of rules with the goal in mind, right? How do we modernize our licensing system so that it works better for our constituents, but keeps to our core responsibility of not serving the minors and not over serving to adults. And we'd like to have all of that wrapped up by the summertime. It's possible that it could take longer than that, but that's kind of the general timeline. And so it's a good time, right, to have convenings like these, to use the convening authority that y'all at MusicPortland are setting up, right, through bringing people together and saying, what are the problems that we see, and what are the solutions? Maybe those solutions are from Brooklyn, from Chicago, Seattle, other cities. That's something that, frankly, we don't have a ton of time to take our head up from our daily crises as a public agency to go and, stay on the forefront of what other cities are doing. So again, we're entering into this redesign with a different mindset, right? We can learn from others. We don't have to, be afraid of some of these other cities that may have gone further and met the needs of, industry better, while still, keeping to their mission. So, now's the time. And, I'll just say personally that, as you all think about what's on, that list of things you'd like to see, you can send those to me directly, and I'll bring them to the team and work with them. You'll also have opportunity in that rulemaking process for public comment. So there's open public comment, but I'll tell you, just from my government relations background, it's always better to engage early and to engage often than for, just waiting for that public comment period. Some other things I'd throw out there just as levers, that you'll have is, thinking not just of yourself as MusicPortland, but also engaging with those other industries that do entertainment. And there are other, groups that might not be doing just music and would like to see similar flexibility. So again, in that spirit of always kind of speaking louder, those might be some folks to engage. And then lastly, and I'll go back to listening, but the ultimate lever that you'll have, if it's something that is statutorily prohibited, which means we can't change it, right? The legislature would have to pass a law. That's where I think you can think about your role as MusicPortland in influencing the legislature. Because if the legislature passes a law redesigning kind of fundamentally, how we work, we have to adapt to that. And an example of that, that we're dealing with really directly, that's been in the press, is the cocktails to go issue, or drinks to go. Many other states, around us geographically have that. And we've heard loud and clear from industry that that's, necessary for their viability. But, we can't hand wave the law in that respect. And so there's lots of legislative conversations already. And there have been many individual restaurants, bars, entertainment groups, and the collective lobbying groups, right, that have had conversations with the governor and the legislature about how to do that. And, that's one that, if it does pass, if there's a session that legalizes it, we can act like that to make it happen. But just to bring that up as an example of something that, if you want to see a more radical change than we're able to do through our rulemaking, the legislature is the place to go, to do that convincing.
Excellent, thanks. Let's see, I'm trying to figure out, Merritt, can you tell me if we have time for more stuff, or if we need to kind of rein things in?
Yeah, no, I think the conversation has more stuff to do. If everybody can hang tight for another 10, 15 minutes, I think we can raise a few more good issues, and then we can start breaking out, and I can go and open up the meeting room, and Maliki and Bim can stay here and even keep talking. So if people are just itching to get their conversation started, they can join me in the room, and we'll put the post up in a little bit of how you do that.
Yeah, I've got a question in the chat that I'd like to bring up then, and not to get too deep into rules with you, Nathan, but it is interesting that there's for 18 plus venue access, we often see venues going, hey, if it didn't cost us more, we'd sell tickets to 18-year-olds and then sell drinks to everybody that's 21 plus. But since it has to be so different, it just makes the math not make any sense. You know, it's like if you got to run a thing through the room, or if you have to make sure nobody has a drink right here, but they do over there, it just complicates it to a level where we're in a city that doesn't have a dedicated all ages venue. We're in a city that really has almost no access for someone the age 18 to 20. But that's not true, to Andre's point, at a Blazers game. You know, you can be 18, get a ticket, sit right next to somebody with a beer at a Blazers game, you know, but in a venue, for some reason, it's different. And my curiosity is just like, how can we, you know, come up as an industry with whatever it was that restaurants and sporting hosts and all those, you know, industries did to show that we're good faith and that we're creating spaces that are safe for 18-year-olds, that, you know, it's like, we've already got, you know, if most live music is happening at bars, in my view, it's kind of awesome, because it's like you already have the people in the room are holding an OLCC card. All the bartenders know how to, you know, tell if someone's too drunk. They can also tell if somebody's 18. So our question is just like, what gives on that? You know, like, can you give any context of how those rules are so different in Oregon? Like, why is it that we're, you know, I talk to a lot of bands that tour nationally and they skip Oregon, you know, because they want to do all ages, you know. So for us, it's kind of like, what gives, you know? Like, not to put it too, you know, flippantly, but it's like, what's different, you know? How can we help to you know, positively change this stuff, you know?
Yeah. You know, that's a really good question, and I'll answer it from kind of maybe a unique perspective here. You know, when I joined OLCC over 5 years ago now, the first time to start setting up the marijuana program, I did it because I loved that we were creating regulation on a totally clean slate, right? Colorado and Washington had come before us, yeah, but it was an opportunity to do something the Oregon way, right? And to set up a system to bring a lot of folks that were operating in the illegal market into the legal one, right? To create this thriving craft industry. There were lots of exciting things about that. And I think we've, you know, collectively as an industry and as a regulatory entity, the legislature, the governor, all done a great job with that. But liquor is just, it is, like you said, enormously complicated. And the metaphor I use is basically the opposite of a clean slate. Since Prohibition, you know, there are laws that have been passed that's like, you know, putting a bunch of different size, different color, you know, different firmness level bricks on top of each other to build, you know, this construction of a regulatory system that we have now. And, you know, I said earlier that the licensing part of our liquor rules, which is Division 5 and 6, haven't comprehensively been looked at in at least 20 years, right? Maybe up to 30. And so, you know, I would say that is reason number one, you know, for how we got here. And, you know, there are definitely I mean, some of you might be listening to be like, well, you know, when you have something like that, it's too messy. You just need to knock it down and start from, you know, clean slate. I have been there, right, on the cannabis side. There's something appealing and elegant about that. But on the flip side, and this is, you know, me thinking with my regulator hat on, every brick is there for some sort of a reason. In one of my hobbies, I'm a private pilot, and we joke that all the FAA regulations that seem, and many times, really overly burdensome or like really specific about a certain amount of thing, it's there. The joke in the FAA is it's there because it's written in blood. It's because of an accident, someone died there. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a case for all of our liquor rules or the laws, but there was some intention at some time, right, that caused for it to be placed there. And those are the exact reasons why we're embarking on this, you know, rulemaking project to revise them, because in many cases, I don't think they fit industry needs. And I think we can make those changes without sacrificing any of our public safety and any of our public health responsibilities to protect kids and to make sure, you know, adults aren't getting overserved. And I will tell you, just in the spirit of like honesty, right, and just the nature of our system, is that alcohol addiction in Oregon is a serious issue, and there are other, even government entities, right? The Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission, they've got a great strategic framework where they talk about the challenges there. The Health Authority, does campaigns around excessive alcohol. So, what we want to do as the OLCC is we want to write them in a way that works for small businesses, right? And being able to keep hold to those core values. And that's what we're looking to do with the rules. So I know I maybe answered way too long or over answered part of your question there, but I think now really is the time to start talking about what that system would look like. And I think the better you can kind of see where we're coming from, right? That piecemeal of a building and, the fact that we've got to balance interests, I think that will help you be more effective with us, right? Because you can say, hey, Brooklyn did this, and oh, by the way, they haven't had, enormous issues with sales to minors, or, here's what some of the compliance folks do, that really works. Maybe you should think about adding mediation training in here. And I'm just picking those off the top of my mind here. But the more you can kind of, think from our perspective, the more we can think from yours. I think that's where we'll have
Cool.
progress.
This is going to work. We're going to change everything here then, because we're here for it. Like we're ready to actually get all the right people to the table and do it. So great. It's good to hear that you guys are down and that you have committed to doing everything that we want. No, but it is good to know that that there's kind of a preferred approach. Sometimes when we address stuff like this, especially with like policy stuff, sometimes you get to the state legislature and lawmakers don't want to pass something that Washington did because we're Oregon, and so it is good to know like you're open to having good case studies from other cities, so that's great. And we have, as MusicPortland, that's part of what we do, is we talk to other cities that have groups like us and trade associations, and we share knowledge. So hopefully we can just gather together some, good stuff. One thing that I'm seeing people ask about is just like, how can regular people find out how to engage with that new rulemaking process that you're talking about? Is there just like a URL they can go to then start to organize in their own, just as an individual person? How could they engage?
Yeah. So we, certainly I'll put our website, kind of our main website, in terms of licensing into the link. But if you really want to get really down and dirty, I would listen to our commission meetings. We had a special commission meeting today actually about a contested case. We have monthly meetings. Again, they're all public, and the more you can attend those and see how staff talks about specific cases, if it's a licensing or compliance issue, or when you listen to our policy updates, I think that will give you a sense of how we operate. Also, you've got our legislative presentations, and we've presented over the past 2 special sessions, and we'll be presenting at House Economic Development next week. But most of it's about COVID, right? The last one was a little bit about marijuana response to the wildfires. But you can start to get a sense of how we think through problems. And I think, the more you can listen to that, the better it will be. If you've got like a specific licensing question or issue, or you're thinking about, taking a new approach or launching a new venue or something, it never hurts to go ahead and reach out and try to have a conversation with the regional office, which in this case is Portland, or your inspectors and liquor licensors.
Cool. Excellent. I think, who's got something on their mind that they want to say? Anybody?
Sorry, my hand is
I'll go after you.
So I guess I wanted to take a...
Wait, Sam, did you?
No, I said I'll go after him. He's first.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to take a step back and kind of see what our kind of end game, like where we want to be in 5 years, sort of thing. I know it's kind of that's kind of a tried and true question, but it's like, do we want to have a situation where, kids are mixed with adults drinking alcohol side by side at a show, or do we want to take alcohol, just the reliance on alcohol out of the show process and the show presentation process, and maybe even have venues that can survive on a small scale, not serve alcohol or serve a minimal amount of alcohol. And I'm kind of like to hear from the panelists, even Andre, to kind of like, what is the vision that we're looking for, I guess, and try to figure out exactly how to get there in some ways, because alcohol, I still really feel that it's a subsidy, and if you take it out of the equation, the money to produce these shows really has to come from somewhere else, and we have to think about where that money is coming from. And it's looking at other countries. I manage an artist who does a lot of shows in France, and there's regional arts coalitions that basically just totally subsidize bands coming through. And I know that that's not a very American sort of thing, but I think there's an element of looking for other places for subsidies, other revenue streams to support us doing an all ages show that'll make it financially reasonable and sustainable.
Sam?
You're muted, Sam.
My bad. I said, no, I'm gonna let Drake and you guys answer that question. I have something else I kind of wanted to speak to with the OLCC.
I'll admit that I am growing to a fan of it not being a one size fits all, but being on a spectrum. I think that there should be some way of subsidizing an all ages ecosystem, because that can be a pipeline, not just for talent, but for sound engineers, for security, for bookers, for managers to make their way up into the adult sphere. I also think that there could be venues where, like a basketball game or a sports game or where you can have adults drinking alcohol right next to the kids. Maybe, like to what Nathan said, maybe it's not class 5, shots of tequila and shots of this. But I mean, I do think there's a range that I think with some real, exactly right. MusicPortland is hitting about backwater. I think there are means of doing that. Just how do we create a system where we're sharing those resources and we're really talking about it, and it's not just kind of hushed back room conversations. I mean, I would love it if we could figure out some sort of, hotel tax or travel Portland, allocation for a dedicated all ages space that was alcohol free, because it did have a role in feeding and teaching young people about music and teaching families about music, and doing it in a way that, the symphony gets grant money from RAC, or these people get money from there. So that's where I'm coming from. I think there should be a way that we can.
Yeah, cool. And I feel like I'll just say really quickly that it does seem to me like there's a pretty broad consensus that no one's trying to say, let's do prohibition. And also no one's trying to say, let's keep all ages only over here and the other only, like nobody's going for that, like binary kind of solution. And for me, the great question to ask about that then is like, okay, cool. Why is it so imbalanced now then? It seems that everybody agrees that improving access will strengthen the industry long term and right now be a benefit to the communities. And so the question is just like, how do we remove roadblocks? How do we get rid of the reasons why people gave up on stuff? And that I think is something where we have real power when we start to actually combine together with our powers. I'll go to you, Sam.
Yeah, and getting right into what you kind of were saying right here is because the people who are mostly affected by these rules and these regulations aren't at the table or not part of the OLCC. I believe that the OLCC in our state especially has way too much power. I believe that I've lived in Indiana, I've lived in Memphis, I've lived in Arizona, I've lived in California, and the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, I think, is the most hands-on organization I've ever seen in terms of regulations. And like we've heard today, man, a lot of this stuff hasn't been touched, changed in 20, 30 years, right? Which means it's been a huge disconnect of what's going on now as opposed to what was going on then. Also, I think that something that is very, very, excuse me, somebody keeps calling me. I don't know who the heck it is. But it's the lack of consistency. I think that a lot of the rules change depending on who and where, why. I don't think across the board, it's a lot of consistency with what the information that we receive from the OLCC. I don't think it's a lot of consistency in enforcement. I don't think it's a lot of consistency with licensing. I don't think it's a lot of consistency in a lot of different realms. And so when these things come up, right, just in this little conversations we've had over this hour, we've come up with a lot of solutions, right? And a lot of different ways and directions to look at some stuff. But again, we're not the ones making those decisions. We're not the ones sitting in those rooms making those calls. And again, speaking from my place as an African-American man in Portland, who makes a living off hip hop, right? And those things, man, I'll just go on a quick example of when I opened my bar in 2010. I applied for my OLCC license in September, 45-day process, allegedly, right? 45-day process. It took me 6 months. Never been in trouble, never, have any alcohol. I have a job. All the things, check all the boxes. But, I applied at the same time as one of my friends who wasn't, that didn't look like me, and they got theirs in 30 days. It took me 180, right? So I think it's not consistencies with that. It's a lot of inconsistencies. And I think that OLCC, and this is not taking, I don't know Nathan what he does for them, but just in terms of, I don't see the consistency with the OLCC across the board. And I think that's a very, very huge problem. I think that's a problem that venues have, because one day this is cool, the next day it's not cool. One day you can do this, the next time you can't do that. One day, and so I think until there's some consistency in there, and also some accountability, I believe that OLCC really can do whatever the hell they feel like, right? And pick and choose, and it affects a lot of people across the board. So until we can kind of start having some conversations around that, we'll be in this position, because this is not rocket science. Like, we can figure out ways to have 18 and over things. We can figure out ways to have all ages events. We can figure out ways to do all this stuff, because it's done in different spaces. You can go to the Motor Center, sit down, you and your baby, your kid, watch LeBron James and drink as much tequila and beer as you feel like, right? You know what I'm saying? But in other situations, it's not the same. So I think that's one of the major pieces for me, because I've lost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars dealing with, the way that OLCC chooses to enforce things and not to enforce things. So that's something for me that I look at.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's the thing, is that, like, that kind of stuff, we don't, when I look at let's do the 5-year thing, let's look at where we want to get. That's the target. No more of that, let's get to where we work that out, to where people can come to their collective and say, I'm having this problem, should it be taking, I thought this was going to be 45 days. I'm at 90 days. What's going on? And then we can start, we can have an open line of communication with someone like Nathan at OLCC and say, hey, if somebody as part of MusicPortland is having a problem with the license, what's going on here? And we can start to get some accountability that way. And then, as well as that, we can go in and eventually, hopefully, we can work with the OLCC to come up with all the best practices, because honestly, I don't think that as an institution, OLCC has that intention. I think that maybe institutions, institutions definitely allow for a lot of shit to go on. And so the trick is, I don't think OLCC is inherently anything. Let's go change it. Let's go take it over. Let's go be the basketball people, or whatever the people who are getting their way. I don't see why we can't do that. We're organ citizens. We're organ business owners. If you
money, man.
Exactly.
Money.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, though. I think
money controls whatever anybody does, man.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But
that's the sucky part.
Yeah, I do think there's something to be said for the collectivism and for us to come at it together and go like, dude, you having that experience is not right. And I'm with you on that. And if it's going to happen to you, it's not going to happen under our watch. You know, like I do think that
Yeah,
that's,
definitely.
and so for me, I'm just saying I'm here for that. Oh, Mary, you're muted.
I'm going to break in because we can't start the breakout until we close this out. We've
Sorry, I
been
just
putting
wanna
the
talk.
posting. I know, we thought we could do both. We're posting the link for everybody in the chat. Make sure you grab it, or you can go to the events page on musicportland.org. And so come over there. I'm hoping that our panelists are willing to come over and join a conversation and be talking to people directly, because this is a phenomenal conversation. The other thing I'm going to say is that Bim is on our Music Policy Council. He's going to be leading our OLCC data collection, keeping connected with Nathan, like really helping to evolve this thing. There've been amazing comments and obvious engagement in the chat, and we would definitely like to start to bring other people into this conversation. We're going to be scheduling focus groups, you know, with venues, with musicians, to really sort of pick apart and make sure that what we're communicating to the OLCC is a holistic solution that considers everybody in the mix, and not just venues or not just musicians. You know, we want to make sure that it is equitable, that it is holistic, and that really is looking at the larger health of our total ecosystem. And I think we can get there. And Bim is going to be the man at the front of the spear. So, you know, we're lucky for that. I am going to thank everybody. Hope to see you in the breakout session. Panelists, make sure you grab it out of the chat. We're going to close this out and head over there because we want to hear what this group is talking about.
Yeah,
Definitely.
thank you all so much.
Zoom at 7:30, so I can't make it over there, but it was a great having a conversation with you guys and look forward to talking to all you again.
Awesome. Take care,
Okay,
Sam.
thank you.
All righty.
Thanks.
All right. I'm closing out.